Hello everybody, I'm Ursula Dubosarsky and I write books for children. I'm also the Australian Children's Laureate, which is why I've got this laurel wreath on my head, and it's also why I've got my friend there, the Laureate Magpie. And my job as the Australian Children's Laureate is to talk to as many people as possible about what a wonderful thing it is to read. And today I'm going to read to you from a book that I've written, which is called Brindabella. Now this book is illustrated. It's a novel, but it's got pictures inside it. And the pictures are drawn by my very good friend, Joyner. And the story is all about a little kangaroo, a little Joey, called Brindabella, which is why I've brought along my other furry friend at the back here. It's a kangaroo mother with a little Joey in her pouch. Now, the book is about Brindabella the Joey, and it's also about a boy called Pender who finds Brindabella, the little Joey, in the bush. And her mother has died. And Pender knows that he needs to rescue the little Joey because without her mother she's too little and she will die. She needs to be brought somewhere safe to be looked after until she's big enough to go back into the bush by herself. And so I'm going to read you that part of the story. It's chapter 4, and it's when Pender has just found little Brindabella and he has to pick her up and carry her home to see how he can look after her until she's big enough to look after herself. So, Chapter 4. It would be impossible to say who was more amazed by the sight of the other, the boy or the Joey. Brindabella made a sudden lunge forwards. She was straining to get out of her mother's pouch. Her legs were so long it seemed as if she was tangled up with her own body. Pender hesitated. He wanted to help the Joey get out, but he was afraid that he might hurt her. Or she might hurt him. She must be very frightened, and her claws looked sharp. But if I don't help you, said Pender, only realizing the truth of what he was saying as he spoke the words, you will die. He could see that the Joey had fur and was big enough to hop around by herself, but he knew she was too young to survive without her mother. She needed her mother just like those little baby birds behind the hen house with their endless opening beaks and their tiny cries. If he left the Joey there by herself, she wouldn't have enough to eat or drink, and she wouldn't be able to get away from dingoes or wild dogs. Pender couldn't bear to think that the Joey might die. He had to keep her alive, keep her safe. But how? I'll take her back home with me, he thought. Dad will know what to do, how to look after her. His father knew all about animals, not just cats and dogs and chickens, but all sorts of bush animals as well. He'd know the right thing to do. He'd understand that Pender couldn't just leave her where she was. Dad will know, he murmured to the Joey. Don't worry. Brindabella pushed her delicate shoulders halfway out of the pouch. Her fur was patchy and growing in all directions. Pender untied his jacket from around his waist. He knew he had to act quickly to make sure he got hold of her before she was able to hop away from him, terrified, into the bush. Now was the moment. He came forward swiftly and closing the Joey in his jacket and lifting her up out of the pouch into his arms. He held her struggling, shaking body against his chest. Brindabella arched her back like a cat. Don't be afraid, said Pender, hanging on tight. She was strong. Don't be scared, Joey. I won't hurt you. How her heart was hammering. She pushed wildly against him with the claws of all her legs, slapping her tail. Pender stood up and pulled the flaps of his jacket around her as firmly as he could. The Joey dug her claws into him and he bit his lip against the pain, but he didn't let go. He clung to Brindabella, and Brindabella clung to him. And here, have a look at this beautiful drawing that Joyner has done of Pender holding Brindabella in his arms and taking her out of the bush to somewhere safe. They left the forest together, slowly and carefully, back through the wall of trees and down very slowly to the riverbank. Pender held the trembling creature close to his heart. She seemed to become calmer with the movement, and her thin little tail swung down from the jacket. They made their way together along the winding pathway strewn with yellow wattle and fallen branches, following the river steadily all the way until they reached the muddy slope that led up to the house. Pender climbed straight up the hill to the hut where his father and Billy Bob the dog were. The cows in the field watched him, as did the old horse with her head over the fence. Pertalote the red hen and the other hens, and even Ricky the cat on the roof, all watched and wondered. When he reached the hut, Pender stood at the closed door, smelling the smoke of the wood fire. He felt completely exhausted, as though he might faint. He couldn't take a hand from where he held Brindabella, even to knock. "Dad," he called out. "Dad!" There was the sound of Billy Bob getting up and pattering across the floor of the hut. His wet nose poked under the gap at the bottom of the door. Then Pender heard his father pushing his chair up, then footsteps. The door opened. Billy Bob stood at the door and wagged his tail. Then he held his head to one side and sniffed. He let out a low growl. Pender's father had a wet paintbrush in his hand, and he looked blankly at Pender. Not crossly, but as though he might have forgotten where he was. That's what he was like when he was in the middle of painting a picture. "Pender," said his father, "what's wrong?" Because Pender had begun to cry. Tears were rushing down his face. He couldn't speak. Instead, he lifted up his jacket and he showed his father what lay underneath. Brindabella raised her head, her ears turning and twitching. And that is the end of chapter 4 of Brindabella. I hope you enjoyed it, and you might be able to find the book in the library, your school library or the local library. Hope you're a member of your local library. It's free, and you can go there to borrow books, and you will probably, I think, be able to find a copy of Brindabella in the library if you want to read more about that story. Thank you so much for listening. It was a bit emotional, wasn't it? Happy reading to everybody, and I hope to see you again sometime. Bye from me, bye from Magpie, and bye from the kangaroos.